Terra's Story, Chapter 22. Terra, Joan, and Brian huddled around the table in the corner of Boo's Bistro, blowing on the steaming jambalaya and cooling their mouths between bites with almost cold beer. They could hear Boo and Bo bickering in the kitchen. Boo's throaty alto had an unusual shrill note to it. "I told you that generator wasn't strong enough for the big freezer and the fridge both. Thank goodness we found the shrimp before it thawed all the way. The beer ain't gonna spoil, even if they prefer it cold. Bo's bass response came slow and patient as always. "In this weather, it don't make no never mind. You notice they ain't complainin'." The trio outside chuckled. Brian called out, "And we're not gonna complain either. We're just grateful to have something warm and tasty to keep us going. Don't y'all worry." They heard embarrassed laughter from the kitchen. Joni pursed her lips and gave him a sideways glance. "Y'all? Are you a Southern boy, Brian Grimm?" He grinned at her. "I can be whatever I need to be, ma'am," he drawled. "But sure enough, I did me a stint in Texas at Fort Hood at the beginning of my career." She rolled her eyes, but the corners of her mouth quirked up. Can we get back on topic here, please?" Terra cajoled as she wiped up the last bit of jambalaya juice with one of Boo's fresh rolls. "I'd like a break, too, but I don't see how I'm going to get any rest until we get past this crisis." She rolled her head to ease the stiffness in her neck. The lightness of their banter evaporated immediately as the image of their tormentor returned to the forefront of their minds. "Damn him!" muttered Joni. Brian reached over and patted the fist she'd clenched on the table. "Don't let him get to you, Joni. That's what he wants. If his taunts get us all worked up, we'll miss something. Working with energy like this, the signals can be subtle, and we need to follow the trail of his signals." "You mean trace it back? How do we do that?" Joni asked, then sat back, thinking. Brian continued. "Well, what critters have the most sensitivity to signals? Snakes and lizards feel vibrations in the earth beneath their bellies. Winged ones feel shifts in air currents, and probably electromagnetic frequencies, too, since that's how they navigate." "Bats!" Terra exclaimed. "Since they navigate by a sort of sonar, wouldn't they be extremely sensitive to the kind of telepathic signal this M seems to be using?" "I think you may be onto something, Terra," Brian encouraged, his eyes lit up with interest. Joan leaned in too, her eyes equally bright. She followed the trail. "So if one of us can shift into a bat—" She paused and glanced outside, where early evening dark had taken over. Normally the low, leaden clouds would have reflected city lights, but now there was no reflection of any kind on the wet concrete sidewalks. "Or maybe," Terra paused and looked at each of them, "or maybe we all could. We know how to throw our consciousness into another creature. It's a different kind of shape-shifting than my Moo or your tabby cat, Joanie, but it's the same quantum field, right? Can we try? I want to see what we might be able to pick up with bat radar." Brian's face showed intense focus. "I feel some bat energy. There's a colony not too far from here, Terra. Is there a cave in that park near your place?" "Yes, there must be. I often see them at twilight, flitting about the edges of the lake, catching mosquitoes and such." She stood, excited now. "Let's settle up with Boo and go to my place." From the balcony of Terra's apartment, the darkness seemed thick and dense, but they could hear some faint clicking sounds. "That's them," Brian whispered. "Bats make sounds that are 2 or 3 times higher than humans can hear. When they use echolocation, humans are only sometimes able to make out very quiet clicks. Slowed down, the clicks are actually chirps with a distinct tonal progression." "Flying mammals," Joni considered. "That's more of a stretch for you two than me. At least a tabby is a mammal. Your Mo is a reptile, Terra, and Brian, your hawk is a bird and not a mammal, though it's warm-blooded. Do you think any of that matters?" "Not a bit, Joan," Brian responded. "It's a matter of our consciousness shifting molecules into a different form. We could become a tree if we wanted." He hesitated. "Although that might be a slower shift." He grinned. "I'll try it sometime when we're not in a hurry." He noticed that Terra had already begun to move into an altered state and settled down himself. Joan closed her eyes too, and let the sensations of the night take her. She felt the gusts of wind and smelled the wild scents of the park, the mud from days of rain, the algae around the reeds at the edge of the lake. Her senses sharpened. She could hear the whispers of leaves talking, hear the buzz of insects hiding in the rough bark of the trees. She felt a pull to the sky and, without thinking, opened her mouth and captured several of a swarm of mosquitoes. Suddenly hungry, as though the mouthful were an appetizer, she sent out her senses and found several other swarms. She darted and flitted, feeling free and light, only faintly sensing others of her kind on the hunt with her. Once her belly felt full, she focused her sensors again and located her companions, also slowing their hunt. They sailed the air currents stirring the lake, seeking. And there it was, a different kind of signal, seeking them. Another being's sensors searching for a conversation, twisting the dial, as it were, to tune in to thoughts they weren't having. She soared nearer the other two, whose flight patterns had shifted from darting and flitting to circling and sensing. They felt it too. It wasn't a pleasant sensation, but a discordant energy she instinctively wanted to avoid. But her human consciousness was strong enough to calm her bat's recoil. She flew closer to her companions, whose vibration echoed the internal struggle of her own. Somehow she knew how to interpret the squeaks and chirps that punctuated the night. She turned and felt them turn with her. Together, they flew toward the faint light of the candle inside the hurricane globe on the balcony, their blindness sensing the heat more than the light, but nevertheless guiding them unerringly toward home. "Wow," Joni exclaimed under her breath, laying back limp on the lounge chair. "Yeah, me too," Terra agreed. Hump," mumbled Brian, still hardly present. "So we know we can sense him? Do you think he could feel us too in bat form?" Joni queried. Terra shrugged. "Dunno, but we've definitely got to erect some psychic barriers when we want to have private conversations." "Joni, is there anything in your druidic practice that can do that?" "Sure," Joan replied. "We erect a dimensional wall. Easy peasy. Intention plus light and energy, fire and air, will block transmission. But don't forget, we can also use his listening in for our own purposes, too. We can create the same kind of holographic images that he does, and if he's not expecting them, I suspect his arrogance about his own abilities will likely blind him to the possibility that we know how to play in these realms, too." Brian sat up as he spoke. "We'll have a lot to tell Cap tomorrow. Now, Joni, your place is closer to Terra's than Boo's. Do you want I should walk you home again?" "Yeah, I'm pretty wiped. You okay on the sofa again?" Joni yawned and stretched, sparking a yawn and stretch from Terra. Brian caught the yawn too and stretched really big, arching backward, then leaning over to touch the ground. "Sure, I slept okay last night." He straightened and shook himself, finally relaxing. "I brought the maglite, and tonight," he patted his holster, "I'm packing heat. This M guy is getting too close for comfort. He's giving me the heebie-jeebies." "Don't worry, Han," Joni smirked. "I'll protect you." "Oh, goody," Brian quipped. "I feel so much safer, Ms. Meow." "Well, if you guys need more backup, just send me a signal. Baby don't take nothing from no one." Joni snort laughed at Terra's quip and with her arm around his waist, guided Brian out the door.